actually want to play that section of the Beethoven concerto right at the frog, but it doesn't change the fact that you should still be able to. I'm Tobias Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter one-topic video, and because it's so short, but also one of the most important things that I've ever addressed in violin playing, let's get rid of our obligatories right off the bat. So, of course, if you like the video, please comment after I'm done. I'd be very curious to hear if any of you have ever had anyone talk to you about what I'm going to talk to you about today, which I'm going to guess you haven't. And then, of course, if you are interested in having me or one of my assistants help you with your specific problems in your bow arm or your left hand or anything else in violin, then please send an email to admin@murphymusicacademy.org. Link will be in the description below. And, oh, by the way, I'm adding cello and viola here pretty soon. So be watch out for my new teachers that will be joining Murphy Music Academy here in the near future. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe. Now, there's a common issue that almost every good teacher will want to address with their students, and my old teacher certainly did, and that is the very, very common fear that most students have of playing in the lower half of the bow, or at least past the balance point towards the frog. The thing is, you bought the entire bow, you might as well use what you paid for. And if not you, then you've certainly seen plenty of students trying to do every possible bow technique at the tip, where they feel much less intimidated and ignoring the bottom half of the bow like the plague. I don't like the frog. It's coarse, it's rough, and when I try to use it, it just goes everywhere. The thing is, your fear of the frog in the lower half of the bow is keeping you from realizing your true potential as a violinist, as so much good bow technique is best executed closer to the bottom half of the bow rather than trying to force everything to work at the top half of the bow. So in order to take advantage of the entire bow, how do we overcome our natural fear of playing close to the frog and, in fact, even actually get comfortable with playing down here? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a little motion in the arm that we don't really think about too often, but is actually incredibly important in conquering playing near the frog. So if I were to break down all of the possible motions of the bow arm by each joint, then I would have to, of course, have the shoulder motion going this way, which you should very, very rarely do. And then I would have the motion at the elbow, which is the most important motion here. And then, of course, as we start to get down to here, we have the motion of the wrist, we have motions of the fingers, and then we have the pronation and supination motion. But there's one more motion that we're forgetting. And it's actually very similar to this, but it's the rotation, if I lifted my arm up like this, the rotation of the upper arm like so. Now, the reason that this motion is so important is because it allows us to minimize even further the amount of motion from the shoulder going this way, which many people, as they get closer to the frog, they end up bringing their shoulder in a lot more than they actually have to. As you do a whole bow close to the frog, you do have to move the arm from the shoulder, which is the least stable of all these joints, which is why, when you first learn, you hopefully learn to keep the shoulder still and move from the elbow so you can have a nice controlled straight bow. But as you get close to the frog, you do have to start moving the shoulder inwards this way. However, if you don't take advantage of this motion, closer to the frog, then you are going to have to move the shoulder joint much more, and then playing at the frog is going to look a lot more like this, which is going to be a lot more difficult and a lot less easy to control. So, how does this motion help? Well, first off, you take your bow, point it straight at the ceiling, and make sure that your arm is essentially parallel to the floor, and put the bow right in front of the strings like this. Now, don't actually put it on the strings. We still want it pointing straight up. Now, if I actually do this motion, and just a little bit of this motion, look what happens. Right? I'm able to actually move the bow in a straight line. So I'm using a much smaller, much more controlled motion in the upper arm. That allows me to play, essentially, if I tilted the bow this way, to essentially play at the frog, right at this, last few inches of the frog, with much less motion than I would if I was swinging my arm up this way instead. So if I keep the arm up here, move like this, then I actually have a lot more control and don't have to move the upper arm inwards as much. You can then combine this with a little bit of the motion of the elbow. So again, we get to use the motion of the elbow, which is the most stable motion in the bow stroke. So if I start, see, there's actually a very little amount of rotation here in the upper arm, and then it continues forward with the elbow. And then any motion of the shoulder coming inwards this way is purely sympathetic and follows the bow, which is what we want it to do, rather than leading the bow stroke. So if I start here, I'm still able to use some elbow motion because of that. And if I wasn't using that type of rotation, then I'd have to move my entire shoulder this way, but this way. And it also helps keep the motion much more horizontal rather than vertical, which achieves a much smoother bow stroke. And then as I get past the balance point, I can continue on with the elbow as normal. And then coming back up, the same thing. Now, it's such a small motion that when you watch someone do it, you may not even realize, and they may not even realize, they're actually achieving that by doing a slight rotation in the upper arm back and forth this way. But if you're able to grasp onto this, and I would advise at first just starting with your arm essentially parallel to the floor, bow pointed straight up so you're not actually touching the strings, and just trying to get a straight pattern of motion by doing that, without, of course, raising the shoulder in the trapezius muscle. If you're able to achieve this and put this into your general bow arm practice, then you are going to have so much greater control at the frog. Now, of course, this is not the only thing that is going to help you learn to play at the frog. The other most important thing, which I've already actually talked about in other videos, is the control of the fingers and feeling, as you're doing this, the weight distributing from one side of the fingers to the other. However, when it comes to the bow arm motion, learning how to use this is going to be one of the most useful things that you can do in your playing generally, not just even for playing at the frog, but also for complicated string crossing passages where instead of moving your entire arm up and down for each string, you can actually use this same rotation motion to cross strings with less effort and less motion. And again, this way, the motion of the elbow either inward or up can follow the bow instead of lead where the bow is, which makes you achieve essentially the same thing, but with much smaller motion and therefore much greater control. Anyway, just a short video today. I am terribly sorry how little I've been putting out in terms of content. I've been very, very busy this month, and hopefully I will be able to get to more complicated, more long-form videos soon, but this has been an idea that I've been really thinking about and working with my students on a lot in the past few months, and I did want to share it with you all because I know that it will certainly help your bow control and your playing at the frog and with many other aspects of bow technique. Anyway, I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy, always here to remind you that there is no pleasure in mediocrity. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.